Looking Back as Memoir, Oppression, and Resistance in Lyons Essays. What is usually seen as a simply nostalgic or sentimental looking back is, in African American history, truly an effective and complicated weapon, wielded both by oppressors to justify racial control and by communities as a means of self defense, resistance, and empowerment. Historian Janet Dorick Bell Lyons, in her essays Redemption and Jim Crow, Surviving and Deifying Jim Crow, and The Great Migration, maps out how the post Civil War era of 1896 to 1914 was crucially an epoch when resembling the past loomed large for black struggles. For white Southern elites, the backward look was a revival of slavery's racial order. For African Americans, the act of looking back was recalling resistant tactics and cultural preservation practices that looked forward to a future defined by freedom rather than oppression. Through examining Lyon's essays with his lens, we see more clearly how the past was turned into a battlefield over power, identity, and survival. In Redemption and Jim Crow, Lyons details how Southern whites weaponized history as a political tool. Following Reconstruction, these elites implemented the Redemption campaign to reinstate the pre-Civil War racial polity. They idealized the antebellum South as a society of white domination and black subservience, one they evoked to justify terrorism and legal oppression. Voter suppression, poll tax, and literacy tests were not neutral policies. They were direct attempts to reclaim the antebellum power structure by stripping black citizens of political voice. In that sense, looking back was a regressive and oppressive act, an effort to freeze history by denying black people's progress. But as white Southerners weaponized the past, African Americans were also looking back, but in very different ways. In Surviving and Defying Jim Crow, Lyons shows how black families and communities gain inspiration from memories of previous resistance. Enslaved people had used furtive networks, spirituals, and kinship to survive bondage. African Americans under Jim Crow relied upon mutual aid societies, church committees, and educational activism. The black church would become the center of community survival as well as the organized for civil rights resistance, writes Lyons in Surviving and Defying Jim Crow. This survival strategy was akin to the strategies of enslaved people who had worked against slavery by way of collective worship and underground schools in which they asserted their humanity. To look back, then, was a tool of resilience, a means of conjuring up cultural memory to endure contemporary suffering. Cultural memory, by far the most important type of historical memory, Lyons locates in cultural preservation. Despite the weight of segregation, African Americans held onto many customs formed in their whole land. That includes religion, storytelling, and music, particularly blues and spirituals. As historian Lawrence Levin explains, such traditions served as a cultural armor against dehumanization. Similarly, Lyons argues that Southern Black communities kept the practice of quilting, folk medicine, and oral history alive as a way to resist in silence. By keeping their past, they refuse a white past that rendered them inferior or without culture. But the most radical instance of looking back is found in the Great Migration. From 1915 to 1970, over 6 million African Americans moved out of the South to seek better opportunities in northern and midwestern cities. It was, in more ways than one, not only a geographical journey, but a historical one. The migrants returned from the South with memories of oppression and traditions that gave them strength, explains Lyons in the Great Migration. Their choices to depart have been informed by memories of lynchings and crop lien systems, of disenfranchisement, but also by a long tradition for the press and overloaded when all else fails. Sometimes you got to move. And just as the Underground Railroad carried fugitive slaves northward, black migrants also saw movement as the way to freedom in Wilkerson's 2010. The warmth of other suns gazing at the past did more than provide them with reason to leave. It gave them the audacity to imagine a future where their children could flourish. In some, Lyons' essays reveal to us that what the legacy of looking back means is a great historical force. How oppressors and oppressed alike had put it to opposite purposes. White Southerners went backwards to justify black subjugation, whereas African Americans went back for counter memories, counter narratives, and hope. The survival strategies that had been established during slavery lived on in the time of Jim Crow and influenced the decision to make the migration for new opportunities. For African Americans, the past is not a history of shame and defeat, but a source of strength through memory, but even more as well through resistance. My work cited is The Lyons, Janet Dart Bell, Redemption in Jim Crow. Lyons, Janet Dart Bell, Surviving and Defying Jim Crow. Lyons, Janet Dart Bell, The Great Migration. Levine, Lawrence W., Black Culture and Black Consciousness, African American Folk Thought from Slavery to Freedom. It's Oxford University Press, 1977. And also Wilkerson, Isabel, The Warmth of Other Songs, The Epic Story of America's Great Migration. That's from Vintage Books, 2010. Thank you.